My name is Bill Gutman, and I am the Technical Director for SpacePort America. And I just wanted to spend a little time with you telling you a little bit about what we are, what we're about, and what we can do to help these kinds of activities. We like to say we're the world's first purpose-built commercial spaceport. We started from scratch with a bare piece of desert, and we're building a runway, we're building certain facilities, we have some vertical launch facilities, but one of the things that we don't have is a lot of archaic infrastructure that people have to pay for whether they want to use it or not. So we're lean and mean, but if you need things like that, we do have White Sands Missile Range right across the mountain from us, and we can access a lot of their facilities when needed. Radars, for example, optical tracking, things like that. It's all on a fee reimbursable basis, but we have access to that. You know, we're in the news mainly because of Virgin Galactic and their space tourism program. Right now, I think we expect to see spinning up at our location in something like 12 months, probably maybe 18 months, depending on how the testing goes, how quickly things go. But we have had a number of vertical launch operations, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those a little later. But this is where we are, southern New Mexico, and this is the city of Las Cruces, and the spaceport's, I guess it's about 30 miles as the crow flies north of there. We have 26 sections of land, 26 square miles of land, which is about 17,000 acres. And I'll show you a close-up here in a second, I guess. Now, one of the things about this is most of the land in this area, the pink over here is White Sands Missile Range. The white is federal land owned by the Bureau of Land Management, and the blue is New Mexico State Trust land. It's another type of public land that we have, and we built the spaceport entirely on that because it simplifies the permitting process and makes certain things easier, and it also maximizes the economic benefit to the state of New Mexico. But people were talking a little bit about environmental review, environmental assessments. We did an environmental impact statement, and it took something like a year and a half and cost, I don't know what the final number was, but it was somewhere between $1.5 and $2 million. So whoever said avoid things like that if you can is right on the money. It's not something you want to do. Okay, so here's a little bit more of a close-up. This is the runway for Virgin Galactic. It's now complete. We're building what we call the terminal hangar facility. I'll show you some pictures of these things shortly. But the vertical launch area is this section, these two sections of land, 2 square miles that sort of stick out into the BLM land. And there's a reason why we selected that area, because it provides more isolation from the runway, and at the same time it allows us to have sort of a buffer of public land around the area without actually having to tie up that land. Right now, Up Aerospace has conducted 4 sounding rocket class launches from our location, and they've conducted 4 additional launches of a winged technology demonstrator vehicle for a major aerospace company, Lockheed. But it's down here in this corner at this location. But basically, these 2 sections of land are reserved for development of vertical launch facilities, and we have a long-range plan for developing additional infrastructure there. We've got a lot of good things going for us. Airspace is one of them, because if you look at this, White Sands Missile Range is an Army missile testing facility that actually controls their airspace from surface to unlimited. And so basically there's very little east-west traffic across there because the airlines don't like to plan on going. They can on some occasions, but they don't like to plan on flying through that because they might not be able to. So they build their schedules as if they're not going to do that. So it isn't used very much. And then we're also close to the Mexican border, so there isn't as much north-south traffic as you might expect. So we've got that airspace shadow, and the airspace that we're actually located in is restricted. Another advantage is we have a low population density, and this is one of these, nighttime pictures. The brightness is proportional more or less to the population. So we have a nice dark area. There are a lot of places like that, but most of them are farther to the north. One of the advantages that we have in our location is that year-round outdoor work is practical. It never gets so hot nor so cold that you can't work outdoors. And this is another one. This is something we prepared for when we were pursuing the Lockheed Martin VentureStar program about 12 years ago, because from that vehicle, we actually, given our combination of latitude and altitude, we actually were going to have about a 6,000 pounds of payload to low Earth orbit advantage over the next best competitor, which happened to be Florida.
Well, what is your altitude?
It's about 4,500 feet. Now that's a disadvantage for aircraft systems, of course, for horizontal launch, but it's a real advantage for most rockets. So this is the layout of the site. We do have these lunar lander pads that we installed as well, but this is the up aerospace. The lunar lander pads are here, and we envision that most of the vertical launch facilities that we'll be developing will be sort of in that area. This has all been pre-surveyed. When we did the environmental impact statement, one of the big issues in the Southwest is archaeological sites. And the definition of an archaeological site is pretty broad. I mean, if you find a chip of flint that was used, that was left over for making a projectile point 2,000 years ago, that may be classified as an archaeological site. So we've surveyed all these areas, and there are some out there, but we know where they are, and we know how to avoid them when we construct things. And then, of course, the main thing right now is the runway, 10,000 foot by 200 foot wide runway. It was just put into service 2 weeks ago yesterday when Spaceship Two White Knight 2 combination landed on the runway, as well as our governor and Sir Richard Branson. The terminal hangar facility will house that program. It has a very large hangar as well as terminal capabilities in the same structure, and we are developing the firefighting facility as well. Okay, so this is the artist's conception of what it looks like, and this is what it looks like today. So it's coming together quickly. It's a very large, very complex structure. The shape was designed. One of the issues that we faced in our environmental impact statement was the fact that an old historic trail, the main road from Mexico City, which was the Spanish capital of this part of the New World, to Santa Fe, New Mexico, which was another enclave of Spanish civilization. The main road passed actually toward the direction where I'm standing, and there was concern about the appearance of the facilities from the trail. And so this curved structure is designed to sort of blend in with the terrain, and the roof is actually going to be painted to resemble the natural terrain. So we've had to take extreme measures to make a lot of people happy. And this is the artist's conception of what it will look like, and this is where it is today. So it's a very, very impressive structure. Those of us who've been with this program a long time have a hard time believing what we see when we go out there these days, because we've been waiting for so long for this to happen.
Is that strictly a Virgin Galactic terminal?
It is actually will be owned by the state, and it will be leased by Virgin Galactic. Yes, and I think one of the things that's of concern to people here is what other facilities we might have for vehicle preparation and so on. We can talk about that a little bit later. So these are just kind of fun. This is the ARF, this was an interesting structure because it was an inflatable plastic dome, and then the shotcrete was actually applied to the interior surface by a spraying process, the rebar embedded in it. It's a very, very interesting structure, and we will have our offices. The state of New Mexico will have its offices in this building, and we will have some space in that building for laboratory, for payload processing, and so on. But our main solution to those requirements we'll talk about here shortly. Okay, so the phase 1 construction of the horizontal facilities, the runway is essentially complete. The only thing that remains is we're going to actually add some extensions to the ends of the runway, which are lesser load-bearing capability than the main runway. But the internal roads and the access roads, those are nearly complete. The fuel storage is complete. The THF is probably 60%, something like that. It will be substantially completed on the outside by the end of this year, but the interior build-out will continue for a while, the interior finishing. Likewise with the ARF. One of the things, you never know what's going to come back to bite you on a project like this. Getting the power in the quantity required to the facility has turned out to be much more difficult than anybody would have ever imagined, because the power line has to cross some public land. And again, archaeological surveys, you know, you're going to put poles in the ground, but you have to make sure you don't, if you're going to hit an archaeological site, it has to be excavated, and you know, so it's a complicated process. So right now we're on track to get the power, I think about the end of the first quarter of calendar 2011.
Can you put solar cells on the roof?
Well, we've talked about things like that, but unfortunately that makes the building much more visible from the trail. And although there's some interest in doing that eventually, we think that a better solution is probably to put those off-site somewhere and then pipe the power in. So.
Because the power lines, doesn't matter if they're visible.
Well, the power line's going to be underground.
Oh, okay.
So. Now, Up Aerospace, as I mentioned, they've conducted 4 sounding rocket class launches. The launch rail is theirs, but the rollback shelter belongs to the state. And this is their Space Loft XL vehicle that they've launched, again, 4 times. The most recent one, and I guess the second one and the 4th one were successful. The first one had some aerodynamic instabilities, and the 3rd one had a premature functioning of the separation system between the payload section and the motor section. You can imagine that gets a little ugly when the motor's still pushing, but they're not originally connected. We have our lunar lander pads as well, one of which is duly decorated with rocks and craters. And in fact, I took it out, but there's an interesting picture because of the crater. You know, we are in the desert after all. We get 8 inches of rainfall a year on the average. The crater collects enough water that the cattle that still graze out there like to come and help themselves. So we're using right now just temporary structures for launch control, and that's partly in an effort to keep things lean and mean, because you know there's not a lot of expense in that, and without having specific requirements from specific customers, it's hard to know what to build. So this is our interim solution. We expect to bring in more of either things like this or perhaps some of those ISO shipping containers that have been converted to office use. But we do have some budget, and we do have a strong willingness to talk with anybody, and we do have some ability to build things to people's requirements, provided that we have some kind of a long-term commitment on their use. Again, the launch rail and the rollback shelter, and we have another nice thing out there, a wind profiler. It's a acoustic radar that has a range, vertical range of something like 2 kilometers, I think, and a resolution of about 50 meters, 50-meter chunks going up. So that's very helpful for initial trajectory analysis or wind weighting. This is the kind of process that we go through right now when we're planning for a launch. So, you know, we develop a structure like this. Now, this piece of land within the wedge, it's kind of shaded pink going outside the boundary because we sometimes do air surveillance in that area. And then this is White Sands Missile Range. Now, White Sands Missile Range, again, it's an Army facility, and we can say with a very high degree of certainty that the population within the impact zone is 0. So that gives us a lot of comfort. This area is actually public land, and we have an agreement with the BLM that we won't actually close access to that land, but at the same time we will not launch if there's somebody in there. So we conduct surveillance and make sure no one is there. Now normally there are a couple of ranches in the area, but there aren't very many people that ever go out there. A few years ago we had some folks visiting from the FAA in Washington, and they were telling us one day that they thought that we should, here was the methodology they proposed that we use for doing the population analysis for the license application. Take the census tract and prorate the population within the census tract, and then do the intersection of our safety zone. And we said, well, why would we do that? Because we know where both of the people live. And they, I think, thought we were being a little flippant with them, but the next day they saw that we were being very serious. So this is, again, White Sands Missile Range, and this is actually one of the diagrams that we used in the analysis for one of the Up Aerospace launches. And so the innermost figure is the 1 sigma dispersion, the 2 sigma and the 3 sigma. And so we like to keep that within an area that we know is devoid of people.
So those launches are vertical, absolutely.
Yeah, they typically launch at about 4 degrees off vertical, with the idea of giving it 86 degrees, giving it a definite bias to move in one direction. That's the way sounding rockets are almost always done. They're unguided, they're purely ballistic, and that pretty much guarantees that it's not going to come back and land on top of the launcher or anything like that. So,
What's your longitude?
our longitude is about 33 degrees. It's almost exactly 33 degrees. Okay, so our phase 1 construction is almost completed, but we are doing some phase 2 construction. One of the things right now is we have a hard surface road only from the north, and we want to fix that because it's a bone-jarring road, as Marcus can attest. He's been there. It's a bone-jarring road, and if there's been a rain recently, last summer one day we literally were driving through, I'd say it was about between a class 2 and a class 3 rapids on the way out of there. It can get ugly, but we're fixing that. We will be fixing the road, and probably about a year from now we expect that will be underway and we'll fix that road. A big part of our program is actually, because of the Virgin Galactic thing, is visitation. So we actually are making an effort to develop the facilities to entertain visitors, to keep people happy. We want tourism to be part of this. But of course, that's a very difficult compromise to achieve, because you want people there, but at the same time you can't raise the risk. So we're treading very lightly on that, and we're developing that process. So we're going to keep a lot of the visitation off-site. We're going to develop some visitors facilities in the 2 towns that are nearest to the spaceport along Interstate 25, and minimize the amount of people that are on site at any one time, and have them always under our control. So again, the phase 2 construction, we'll be doing some master planning, but one of the things we're doing in the vertical launch area is some expansion. We expect to perhaps develop an additional pad. We will be extending the utilities. Right now we operate with generator power in the vertical area, and that's a very problematic thing, because logistically just hauling fuel is a very annoying thing to have to do. So we're working on that, getting high-speed communications out there. We will have fiber to the site, but we will have to distribute the fiber out to the vertical area. And so that's where we're going. Also some road improvements. Yes?
Do you have on-site liquid oxygen storage?
Not currently, but we will be developing a pad to accommodate that in reasonable quantities. Typically what are those 5,000 liter dewars or something like that. We're going to develop a concrete pad for the purpose of a temporary siting of liquid oxygen. And once the requirement is there for enough demand, we will bring it in permanently. So that's one of the development plans.
What about other fuel or oxidizers?
Well, there obviously will be nitrous oxide for Virgin Galactic, and we're working with other companies that will require peroxide as well. So we are planning to develop concrete pads and proper fencing and everything that's required for storage of those kinds of propellants. We don't intend initially to bring in and buy tanks, but the idea is that they would be trucked in temporary storage or whatever until such time as the demand is sufficient to warrant actually developing facilities there. And that's one of the things that's key to this, because if we were to, the technology is changing so quickly. I think if we were to make bets on what's going to be the propellant of choice for you guys, for example, it might all be wrong. And so we don't want to make those bets until the last possible time that we can. So, so one of the next big things that we'll be doing is we're going to be developing, we're going out on contract. We're going to, we have RFPs that will be released in the next, probably by Thanksgiving. I think that's the current plan. In 4 general areas: protective services. So we will man the firefighting and rescue facilities with contractor personnel. visitor security, industrial security, all these sorts of things, on-site law enforcement, you know, security guards, those sorts of things. When we're going to have a very high value product out there. We're going to have the Virgin Galactic system. The vehicles are going to be hundreds of millions of dollars, and our infrastructure is hundreds of millions of dollars. So we need security. Then the others are the general services, the technical services, and finally the visitor services. So again, if any of you are interested in those things, those RFPs, look at our website, SpacePortAmerica.com, and the announcements of those RFPs, or the actual RFPs, will be released on that website. It could be as early as next week, but I think more likely it'll be the 3 days before Thanksgiving. And that's it. So, you know, we support these kinds of things. We have always had this desire to keep things as entrepreneurial as possible, and that's one of the reasons that while we are pursuing the very glitzy part of the emerging space industry, that being the space tourism, we're also making sure that we always maintain the capability to support the real bread and butter programs. As I was telling somebody a little while ago, it may turn out 20 years from now that space tourism was a flash in the pan. But one thing we know is 20 years from now the U.S. Air Force is going to be launching satellites, and there are going to be a lot of commercial companies launching satellites. So we want to always have that capability. Right now our license is for suborbital launches, but we see the ability to support development flights for many of the vehicles that you're going to be developing. So I think that's the first place that we can help. And I think one of the things that you need to be thinking about, all of you here, is what those other markets are as well besides orbit. For example, I know for a fact that the U.S. military is looking for good target vehicles for use in anti-missile systems testing. So it's entirely possible that some of the vehicles that you're developing that have the capability of launching satellites into orbit may also have a life as something like that. So think very broadly is the message on that.
Oh, what is the nearest large city to
Yeah, Las Cruces is a city of about 95,000 people now, and it's about, let me go back to that. I think that map is to scale, if I remember correctly.
You're about 100 miles south of
You've got a
Socorro.
railhead there, guys. That's what you're thinking about too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
At the airport or at the, spaceport or at the?
I don't know
What?
about in Las Cruces. I know for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't
Yeah.
know about-
There is actually a railroad line that runs by right on the edge of the spaceport, and the possibility of developing a rail siding, it's in our development plans. It's something that there's no current requirement for, but it will be done. When we were talking with Lockheed about the Venture Star program, we expected that would be the case, because initially they're going to use a lot of propellant, and at some point it would make sense to actually produce liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen on site. But there would be an interim period where it would make more sense, as they're gearing up the flight rate, to haul it in. And rail, of course, is always more efficient than truck, much more cost effective, and large components. So the rail line runs actually parallel to that county road that you're seeing right there. So it's within literally hundreds of feet of the site boundary.
So how far?
Hundreds of feet.
No, from Las Cruces.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think this distance, if I remember correctly, ends up being about 40 miles as the crow flies.
You're about 100 miles south of Socorro.
Yeah, that's about right.
Would the runway be open for landing by civil aviation planes in relation to activities at the launch site?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we anticipate it will be used for. Primarily it will be reserved for the space tourism flights, but we expect that they're going to want to be able to bring in, some of their VIP participants, for example, and there will be needs to fly things in. If somebody needs to fly in a park, for example, there are a lot of reasons why you want to be able to land there.
When do you think you'll be able to support orbital launch attempts?
Well, that's pretty much technology driven as I see it. Anything, any vehicle that drops something in an uncontrolled fashion that lands more than about 50 miles downrange would be very problematic for us right now. But If it's flyback or comes down with some control or can land within that 50-mile window, which would put it within White Sands missile range, then we can talk about that. We did a lot of analysis for when we were pursuing the Venture Star program of looking at E sub Cs for various launch trajectories. And if you have a reliable enough vehicle, meaning like 95% for that kind of a vehicle, there are trajectories that would meet the E sub C requirements. But again, if you drop something in an uncontrolled fashion, you know, in New Mexico we like to say if it falls on Texas we don't care, but unfortunately those two guys do. Well, that's only a joke.
I'm from New Mexico. What is this Texas thing you speak of?
Is there a fee structure for doing work like the up aerospace, or is it a custom?
It's custom because everybody's requirements are different. And one of the big issues that we always face in developing a cost is whether or not you need White Sands missile range support and to what degree you need that. For example, White Sands, we don't have any radars. White Sands does. We don't have any optical tracking. White Sands does. There are a lot of things that they bring to the table. And if we land within their land space, within their ground space, then there is a requirement that we evacuate the landing area. So it depends on how much we require their services. But if we're doing things purely within the spaceport or between the spaceport and the White Sands Missile Range boundary, then we're very, very cost competitive. Anything else?
On, you know, renting facilities or procuring facilities at your launch site, specifically for the vertical end of things, you have basically cold storage containers like the one for the launch rail that you had in the photo that is available for long term.
We don't currently have those, but we have the ability to get them fairly quickly. So yeah.
Are you do you have plans to build a spaceport business development area? Would you like to?
Yeah, you mean a Mojave-like situation or something like that? Yeah, there are. The Virgin facilities occupy only a fraction of the length of the runway, for example. There's some prime real estate along there that could be available for things like that. And then in addition, there's one of the reasons that there's so much state land involved in this is that there are other places where we can do that as well that maybe aren't immediately along the flight line, but are close enough to be to make it very convenient.
You don't show anything about a static test stand. The reason I ask is I'm in Socorro County with a personal 10,000 pound test stand that's threatened by development. So I'm looking for a place to put a test stand.
And we've also been talking with some folks at Emertech who have some test stands, at least one that they're interested in finding a home.
I helped build that.
Okay, and we're very interested in talking with them about that. You know, we've got a lot of real estate out there, and it would fit in very nicely.
You've been talking with them for years, and I need something soon.
Okay, the problem with the discussions we've been having with them is that the facility that they have didn't come close to meeting any of our current needs, and so there wasn't a lot of emphasis on pursuing that very strongly. So.
I have a question. Would you rent space out in the test stand?
Well, I've got to start to get a lot of neighbors near it, and that's the problem. I haven't tested on it in quite a while. Last time I tested, they got upset.
So I guess I'm designing a mobile launch infrastructure. Could I drive it to your place and park it in a corner and say this is my vertical launch center?
Yeah, that certainly was within our model, within the range of things that we can accommodate. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We might want to maybe prepare at the place where you're going to park it, either with a concrete or a gravel pad or something. But yeah, pretty much that's easily within the range of things that we expect to accommodate.
Okay, great.
Okay, so is there like not a set range cost fee structure, or we talk to you and you like we or something?
And again, it's going to depend on what you need, how long you need it. A lot of different factors would come into that. The main driving factor, the reason we're reluctant to give any costs, any hard numbers, is because of the requirement or not for White Sands missile range support. If you want optics, if you want radar, then we have to talk with them. But if you don't need those things, we're not free, but we're very cost competitive.
So it's much cheaper than Cape Canaveral?
Or White Sands, for example. And we see ourselves actually as complementing White Sands in a lot of situations, because White Sands they have a very well developed safety program. They have very large areas. They're 4,000 square miles. They can do things that we couldn't imagine doing. But at the same time, when you go to any of the federal ranges, you automatically sign up to a lot of costs. That whatever that charge is on an hourly basis or a daily basis, whatever it is, it has a lot of things hidden in it that you probably would rather not be paying for, because they have to generate enough revenue to cover the things that you might not need but other customers do. And so we don't have any of that. So we can price those things a la carte from White Sands, and that gives us a much more competitive cost structure.
Okay, now, if we wanted to do a launch from SpacePort America, we have to build our own rail or bring in some?
Yeah, generally, that rail that I showed you the pictures of, it's the property of Up Aerospace. But they are amenable to, if you can build something that fits on that rail, they would be amenable to working with you on that.
Okay.
So, but you can bring your own as well. So.
Okay.
So what kind of order of magnitude costs are we looking at if we drove up with a mobile launcher and all we needed was an impact on BLM land and your restricted airspace and your environmental impact statement?
Not very much. A couple $1,000s probably, something like that. So.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it?
Yeah. Again, it's going to depend on what we need in terms of road closures or anything like that. But yeah, the costs are very, very competitive.
What about sleepover amenities? Do you have some place that you can put up potential customers?
We haven't actually thought about that, but I know people have slept in those buildings that I showed you there. They're basically construction office type structures, and I know people have slept in them. They're not the most comfortable, but that has been done, and so something like that is a possible solution.
Is Virgin going to build any high class accommodations and stuff, or?
They want to do that, but they are very aware of the issue of encroachment and increasing the risk in the risk calculations.
Right.
So they actually, I think, are expecting to do that a good distance from the site, maybe 20 to 30 miles away. There's a large, the largest lake in New Mexico is very close to the site. It's only about 20 or 30 miles away, and that's one of the things that they would probably consider as a siting option.
So they're putting in TFC?
Yeah, TRC, yeah.
TRC has a lot of roads.
What's the typical wind configurations out there?
Wind?
What's the wind like?
Yeah,
Mojave's horrible.
Yeah, we're not as bad as Mojave, and in general, we have a windy season, which is in February, March, April, say, and then we have wind associated with thunderstorms. But almost any time during the year, I've got some statistics on the wind. I can send anybody that would like to see it a table. It's not the most current data, but generally, if you can get an operation off by noon, almost any time of the year, there are very, very few days when you wouldn't be able to perform your operation. Now that's surface level winds. Of course, winds aloft, that's another story. But even there, we've done a lot of analysis recently. We downloaded, I don't know, about 20 years worth of Raywinson data from the nearest NOAA site, and did a lot of analysis on that. And that doesn't tend to vary widely geographically, so the fact that site's 50 or 60 miles away is not really a big concern. But it's like anywhere else when you get up above the ground, the winds are up there.
So your facility is restricted airspace.
That's correct. I should have included an airspace map. Let me go down here real quick. There is, that's not the one I want. Let's go to, the quickest way is going to be to do this, I think. I want to go to the one that showed you.
Semi-sectional.
Yeah. Here it's.
What's the surrounding airspace for issues?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Are there any other airspace encroachments, not you?
No. Okay, this is the one. Now, White Sands Missile Range, they're what I call their core airspace, which they control, and it's restricted essentially all the time, except that they do occasionally on the weekends open it up for commercial use. Then there are two other areas that are available by NOTAM that extend out somewhere over in here. I don't know exactly where. We're within those areas. And White Sands generally has that airspace in use every weekday from, say, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., something like that. So what we do is we schedule our operations with White Sands Missile Range. And that has some advantages because you can set that up in advance and know for certain that you're going to have that airspace available to you at the time that you need it. So.
Now, do you have peak launch times or potential, you know, if you have a delay in the launch, you can reschedule it?
What we typically do is schedule the airspace, say, in 4-hour blocks, something like that. So that gives you some options, but we've done it for longer periods than that too. The very first time we actually did a launch, we called it up for a full 8 hours. So.
Thank you.
If I may also, Bill, the White Sands, if you approach them properly, is not totally hostile.
Yeah.
They actually, Jason Lowry is actually a good friend of mine.
Jason is a great guy. White Sands has some fantastic people working flight safety now. They're very open-minded and very creative in their approaches. And they've realized that, you know, they used to have an extremely conservative approach to flight safety. And they realized that they actually drove away a lot of business. You know, they drove business to Kwajalein that they could have accommodated. So now, by doing the analysis with a little more care, they're able to do a lot of the things that previously people were very concerned about. And Jason in particular, he's fantastic.
Yeah.
Very, very creative, yeah.
6 years.
We work with them regularly. Every time we do a launch, we work with them. On the impacts, for example, all of our planned impacts of the sounding rockets was on White Sands Missile Range. The other vehicles that we've tested, the planned impact was actually on Spaceport land, and 1 or 2 of those actually went awry a little bit and did land on BLM land. But we have a good working relationship with them as well, and so, you know, we would not plan on doing that without prior coordination. But the fact that it happened by accident was not a great concern to them, so we didn't do any damage.
Did you launch any of the target vehicles for White Sands?
We have not done that from our location yet, but that is something that they're interested in because they typically launch their target vehicles from varying distances and angles, and we actually provide them with another possible set of engagement scenarios that they don't otherwise have. So.
And they provide most of the communication support for your launches?
Actually, we provide that through, we are required to have a good line of communications with their range control, but we provide our own infrastructure with the exception of that one link. So we ask them to provide that because they're the ones that have the requirement on for that link, and so they provide that, but everything else we provide. And we will be getting better on that because as we get the fiber installed out to the main site, we intend to have high-speed capability as well as wireless in the area. And for example, VoIP phones are a really good option for a direct line of communication with the missile range if we have a fast enough, high enough bandwidth connection. So.
And what about providing communications for potential customers?
We haven't currently addressed that, but we'd be more than happy to do so. Right now, Up Aerospace, for example, they bring their own communications gear. But we will be actually acquiring some additional communication gear as part of our the next phase. We have all of the work is under contract for the first phase, except the communication infrastructure, and that'll be the RFP for that is out. The bidders conference is taking place, but that's one of the elements of it is wireless within the site. So.
Is there a way to get to White Sands from your direction if you have to recover or something?
Sadly, no.
Helicopter.
Actually,
helicopter.
if you go on to the White Sands, I'm sorry, you're going to need to have escort missile,
Yeah.
called the UXO.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of it.
Yeah, that is an issue for recovery because there is a requirement that you be in the presence of a trained UXO person because, you know, even though the sounding rocket area is not very high risk, that's still one of the requirements. I was in the commanding general's office one day about 12 years ago, I guess, the morning that there had been an accident where a piece of UXO actually killed somebody, and they really bolted things down at that point. It was a very sad day for them, and they've taken that very seriously, and they've really upped the restrictions.
So I assume then the folks at White Sands could provide preliminary information if you're leaving your launch track for flight safety.
Yeah, they can do that. We've contracted with them. They can do some incredible analysis of the radar data. For example, when we had that one vehicle that went awry, it went aerodynamically unstable, and it did a lot of very strange things. It had a radar transponder on board, but the combination of the data from the transponder and the skin track, they were able to pull out a lot of information that was just very interesting to see. I mean, obviously spin rates could be achieved fairly easily because you had the transponder and you could see the transponder pulse as it came around. But they were able to retrieve some orientation information. They were able to get basically 6 degrees of freedom information from the radar. I mean, it was very close to that. It was astounding what they were able to do. You know, they do that routinely because they analyze extremely complex engagements of anti-missile systems and things like that, and they need to be able to do those sorts of things. And so they put a lot of effort into developing the capabilities. And when you need them, there's no substitute. And they like to, you know, they use their radars for real-time flight safety decisions. You know, they do have typically explosive flight termination systems on their vehicles, and they require that radar for their own systems because of the fact that, you know, when you're flying vehicles as energetic as some of the ones that they're flying, there's no room for latency of a GPS-based system or anything like that. So they have those radars there for that reason, and have developed some amazing capabilities.
What's their telemetry coverage?
White Sands?
Yeah, I mean, how far out? Coverage?
I don't know the answer to that question offhand. We haven't yet flown any of the high altitude missions with telemetry on board. The only things we've flown with telemetry on board have been those relatively low performance technology demonstrators. But there are other telemetry options as well as White Sands. I mean, there are commercial providers of those services as well. So, and there's no White Sands requirement for telemetry, as far as I know. Anything else? All right.